A single man has not nearly the value he would have in a state of union. He is an incomplete animal. He resembles the odd half of a pair of scissors. Benjamin Franklin. Hello and welcome. Today I want to talk about how and why single men have been and will always be the target of society's hatred. For thousands of years, people have lived under a strict, conservative structure. It was expected that all respectable men should get married and contribute to this universal duty. People who did not comply with this structure would be putting it at risk, and for a man, the mere fact of remaining single would constitute a form of questioning the prevailing order. Everyone would follow the same path or face the risk of being rejected by their community, and in the distant past, this could be the equivalent of a death sentence. Men's labor is a precious resource, and we saw in my last video that the majority of civilization harnessed it via the control of the male sex drive. And the best tools to harness the potential of the male sex drive are shame, fear, and control. Unmarried men are not as productive as their wedded counterpart. Because of them, the economy stagnates and the birth rate declines. It is imperative that they must be stopped, or the growth of the empire will be impaired. They cannot be allowed to propagate. Wait, I have a great idea. If we create a tax on Bachelor, if we sanction men who refuse to marry, they will run back to the plantation, right? This idea failed time after time throughout history, but even when its multitude of failures proved the complete worthlessness of this belief, numerous governing officials stubbornly persisted in trying to tax and sanction Bachelor. In order for a dominance instinct to be efficient, men require a lack of innate empathy toward each other's. How could it be otherwise when we have battled and killed each other over resources for countless millennia? On the other hand, women possess a mechanism called on-group preference, which grossly means that women spontaneously have each other's back. Furthermore, men have a biological drive to protect women, and when you pair all those factors together, it becomes obvious that we will always sanction men before trying anything else to fix society. It seems natural to do so, and most people won't even bear the thought of questioning such order. We should not expect anything else from how human nature expresses itself in large societies. Both men and women have a natural impulse to take care of women, but no one has a natural inclination to be concerned about men. Is it no wonder that men are and will always be an easy target for society's hatred? With that said, let's take a glance at the prevalence of bachelor taxes throughout the ages. Let's also see why we will soon have a bachelor tax in most Western countries, and why, as a single man, you will always be a target. By about 18 BC before Christ, large shares of Roman men were reluctant to marry. To encourage men to marry, Roman Emperor Augustus passed a series of laws penalizing unmarried men and rewarding men who married and had at least 3 children. It was called the Lex Papia Popea, and sorry if I butchered those words. According to this law, single men over the age of 25 were forbidden to attend public games and banquets. Unmarried men were also forced to sit in less desirable seats in theaters. In winter, they had to march around the marketplace in light clothes, while they sang a particular song which narrated how they were justly punished for disobeying the laws. Besides this, they were deprived of the honor and gracious attention which the young men normally paid to their elders. On top of that, Roman men who remained single had to pay a bachelor tax. Those sanctions applied to men from the age of 25 to 60. Next is a translation of one of Emperor Augustus' speech. Quote, "Oh, what shall I call you? Men? But you are not performing any of the office of men. Citizens? but for all that you are doing, the city is perishing. Romans, but you are undertaking to blot out this name altogether. It wasn't uncommon for Augustus to describe unmarried men as worse than murderers and robbers. Single men, according to Augustus, were immoral beasts. Quote, "You talk, indeed, about this free and untrammeled life that you have adopted, without wives and without children, but you are not a whit better than brigands, or the most savage of beasts. For surely it is not your delight in a solitary existence that leads you to live without wives, nor is there one of you who either eats alone or sleeps alone. No. What you want is to have full liberty for wantonness and licentiousness." Unquote. Augustus' shaming of men implies that Roman men were reluctant to marry because marriage deprived them of freedom. Augustus devised a system of rewards and penalties to overcome the selfishness of bachelors. There were rewards for the responsibilities and hardship resulting from marriage, and penalties to outweigh the obvious advantages of celibacy. But Augustus' law on marriage ended in a complete failure and had little to no effect on men's willingness to marry. And the reason for that is easy to understand. If men were reluctant to marry, it was because guardianship over women, also known as tutela mulerium, and sorry if I butcher this word, it was a burden that men attempted to avoid. If marriage was an opportunity for men to abuse women, selfish men would have been eager to marry. However, the situation seems to have been the opposite. Marriage was a burden. Tutela mulerium was a complicated amalgam of regulation that gave women independence from their husband. However, this law did not liberate men from their traditional responsibilities, which means that it became a one-way transaction that favors women. Women had little to no accountability towards their husband and could keep their entire asset to themselves throughout the marriage, but the same could not be said for men. Husbands had numerous responsibilities and obligations toward their partner, which is why it was called guardianship over women. However, anyone with a good head on his shoulder should know that responsibility without authority is a recipe for failure. For a man living in ancient Rome, marriage was a whole lot of duties and responsibilities that were not reciprocated by their wife. Women were independent from their husband, but those same husbands had to protect and provide for them without expecting any loyalty. When marriage became a one-way transaction that only benefits women, men withdraw. In ancient Rome, divorces were easier to have than they are today with our no-fault divorce laws. In some cases of divorce, fathers would keep custody of their children, but in numerous scenarios where it was not the case, a court of law would require the ex-husband to provide child support to his ex-wife. There were many occasions when a woman discovered herself pregnant after having been divorced. In the absence of modern blood and DNA tests, paternity was hard to establish, and there were instances where vengeful ex-wife, just after a divorce, would pass off a stray foundling as a legitimate child in order to extract child support from their ex-husband. If a man was to remarry, his ex-wife was allowed to come into his home and seize his new wife's dowry. Looking at that, I see a reflection of the current Western world. Today, men's rights end where women's safety and provision begin. That is, men have become second-class citizens, and this is why there is a backlash. Today, men refuse to marry or commit for the same reason that they refused to commit in ancient Rome. I mean, this is not rocket science. When men have sufficient benefits and incentives, they will naturally form families and will happily tie the knot. But if there are no incentives to get married, men will not do it. That's it. It's that simple. If, for say, Emperor Augustus changed the guardianship over women laws and made it fair. Or if he brought back male authority, his single man crisis would have been solved in a flash. Men would have happily rushed back into women's alluring embrace, marrying them by the thousands. As far as brain scans are concerned, sexual attraction for men shows similar result to obsessive-compulsive behaviors. In a lot of cases, the male sex drive is compelling enough to override the survival instinct, which is to say that it is crazy strong. Marriage used to grant a lifelong supply of sex to a man, and when men's incentives to marry are so poor that the fanatical sex drive won't push them to get engaged, society truly is fucked. But here is the ugly truth. Both men and women inherently have more empathy for women than they have for men. Because of this natural tendency, we will never, ever reform laws if it negatively affects women, or if it withdraws benefit or even perceived benefits from women. Guardianship over women was a burden for male citizens, but it was advantageous for female citizens. Thus, tutela mulerium could not be changed. In fact, it wasn't even an option, and it could never be. As a society, we would prefer 1,000 times to sanction, demonize, punish, and ostracize men instead of reforming unfair laws, when those reforms could take away some of the woman's many advantages. That is, instead of making things fair, instead of being reasonable, we will hammer men down until everything crumbles. This is the foolishness of human nature. And spoiler alert, the same thing is happening today. And at the stage that we are in, a collapse is unavoidable. Men and women relationships, as well as marriage laws, are utterly fucked. Men have woken up. They are not going back to the plantation. They are not going back to women. And this is horrifying for women. When the bottom men do not marry, women don't care. But when the top 20% most successful men walk away, women get petrified with fright. In the early stages of human development, the majority of men did not reproduce, but all women did. Because of evolutionary circumstances, I argue that men have evolved to be way better at handling the single life than women. And I even think that most women would be better off being in a wealthy man's harem than being alone. The same cannot be said for men, since a large portion of males were forced to live the single life in the early development of our species. In fact, an overwhelming portion of history's greatest minds were never married. Here are a few examples. Ludwig van Beethoven, one of the greatest composers of classical music. Henry David Thoreau, a giant philosopher of the 19th century. The Wright brothers were famous for developing the first functional airplane. Nikola Tesla, an American inventor, engineer, physicist, and futurist. Isaac Newton, who was the first English physicist and mathematician, most known for developing the universal gravitation and the three laws of motion theory. Edvard Munch, who was a painter and printmaker who largely influenced late 19th century symbolism. Jean-Paul Sartre, one of the most famous existentialist philosophers of the Western world. James Buchanan Jr., who was the only president of the United States who never married. And the list could go on, but for the sake of the length of this video, I will stop here. Now, let's have a look at examples of bachelor tax throughout history. In the 15th century, the Ottoman Empire instituted a bachelor tax. It was found that men who fell under the tax were more likely to migrate to other areas. In 1695, United Kingdoms, a bachelor tax was imposed on men over 25, but after 10 years, it was abolished. In 1821, United States, Missouri, applied a $1 tax on all unmarried men. It was more of a symbolic warning than a real bachelor tax, as it served as a reminder to all single men that they were expected to find a wife. In 1827, there was a protest against a New York legislation that tried to replace a tax on dogs with one on bachelors. The bill was in direct violation of the Great Charter of Liberties. Since 1837, the state of Michigan had made the repeated attempts 9 times to instantiate a bachelor tax, but it always failed. In 1896, Mrs. Charlotte Smith, feminist activist and president of the Women's Rescue League, was leading an anti-bachelor campaign. Our solution to the problem was to denigrate, shame, and sanction bachelors in order to pressure them into marrying. Mrs. Smith believed that bachelors have always been failures, narrow-minded, selfish, egotistical, and cowardly. Here is a famous quote from Charlotte. Quote, "No man can be good, honorable, and upright citizen who has not entered into the holy bonds of wedlock." Unquote. Part of Mrs. Charlotte Smith's remedy was to have bachelors excluded from employment in prominent public sector. Her second punishment proposed a universal bachelor tax of $10 per year, which at the time amounted between 1 and 4 years of the average wage. Fortunately, our proposition ended up in failure. In 1898, Assemblyman Waller of the New Jersey State Legislature proposed a bachelor tax. However, the bill was not passed. In 1921, the state of Montana applied a $3 tax on all bachelors in the state. However, this unjust tax was abolished the next year. In 1923, the town of Repellen, Germany, passed a bachelor tax of 2,000 marks per month. However, this law was quickly overturned by federal authorities. A bachelor tax was levied in Italy from 1927 until the fall of Mussolini in Rome in 1943. By 1936, Italian bachelors paid nearly double their normal income taxes rate. In 1947, Poland introduced a bachelor tax. It was a childlessness tax that included those unmarried above 21, and this tax was effective for 26 years. In the Soviet Union, a childlessness tax, which we all know is nothing but a covert way to tax single men, was enforced for nearly 50 years. In Romania, 1986, a celibacy tax was instituted. Explanations given by the authorities was that those laws were to raise revenue and promote morality. This law continued for 3 years. In 1999, Italy, it was proposed to bring back a bachelor tax. However, the bill did not pass. Bachelor taxes have existed around the globe and throughout the millennia, dating back at least to ancient Greece and Rome, and women are notorious for being passionate advocates of bachelor punishment. However, bachelor taxes never worked, and it won't save Western civilization. On the contrary, bachelor taxes drive men away really fast, and it can only serve to hasten a society's impending collapse. Bachelor taxes will always fail, but I fear that in our foolishness, it will endlessly come back. It is part of an unending cycle. And with that, I will end this video. Thank you for watching, and see you next time. My first book is now available for purchases on Amazon.com. It is a book titled Rise of Man, and it is about MGTOW and the Red Pill. I deeply appreciate any purchase of my book. Feel free to leave a comment on Amazon, as it really helps with the algorithm to boost my visibility. I find this message to be very important, and Rise of Man is available for free on my website, manhoodshittyshit.com, so please feel free to read it here. I also write fictions of the fantastic medieval type. My style is very dark and gruesome, and of course there are some elements of the Red Pill in the interaction between characters. It will be available for free read this summer.